Welcome, everyone, to the latest edition of our podcast. Again, joining me are John Miller and Dan Leahy, two of my colleagues that think just as crazy as I do. We had a new topic that came up today. John will explain, but we want to talk about the problem we have of doing this, shooting ourselves in the foot. John, I think your comment when you saw this image was that was a very well-timed shot.
It was a very well-timed X-ray. And my other comment was, I hope they didn't have to do multiple takes.
Yeah, exactly. So the problem is we often are our own worst enemies. We create our own problems through many of the things that we're doing in our art organizations, the way we organize around value. We like to look around and point the finger at leadership. This isn't just leadership. This is all of us. We're all in the same boat together. So we want to talk today about not only some examples of shooting yourself in the foot from implementing safe, lean, agile mindset approach, but we want to keep it positive on what can you do. And the topic concept we came up with was basically insert art role here. What can you do as Scrum Master, as product owners, product manager, as developer, as what system team member, whatever it might be? What can you do to start removing some of the pain of shooting ourselves in the foot? That bullet's already fired. It's already in the foot. But what can we do to start to remove that and improve and heal from it? John, do you want to share basically the concept of the conversation where this came from?
Sure. So RTE newly, dropped into an art by a company, and the discussion is there's lots and lots of meetings. I'm not using the word for the phrase too many meetings, of course, but I'm saying on this art, there's lots of meetings. And it turns out, and again, we talked about actually sharing the text, which, as I mentioned, don't want to do, but I will get into.
We can get the gist of it.
The gist was you've got an agile release train, so you've got a team of teams. It's a robustly sized one. It's on the bigger end of that, and
I think the
lots of
number was
meetings.
somewhere between 8 and 14 teams. It was 8 a fairly
dozen,
large.
Yeah, many of which are working with and this one, this was by memory, so also on or working closely with other arts. And so all these different places have their own cadences and everything else.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden we start getting into the discussion was actually about how do I set up meetings in this context? And the easy answer, the really simple answer is start at the top. Those are the most important for collaboration, and then flow that down. So if you have a portfolio, those meetings start, and then if you have a art, then those. If you had a solution train, obviously that would be in the middle, and then teams come after that because it's harder to get most people together first. So set up your meetings in the same kind of flow. But then I started thinking about it, and it's not that easy.
No.
And so if somebody's got an agile team that's on this art, and that agile team is also doing work over on this art, and I, it's hard to say this, but it's like, okay, so one of the first things to say is, gosh, is there a chance that we need to go back and revisit the actual setup of the agile release trains? And do we have the right knowledge and skills to take an idea from idea all the way to release to the user? And we know that's not true because of how it's described. And then the next thought that came into mind is, well, maybe we could focus on the stuff that we've got in the SAFE article on continuous delivery pipeline. And this is the text around and the thoughts around the figures 3, 4, 5, and 6 in there, which deal with here's our current state, and here's our metrics from it, and here's how we can identify places where we want to focus to improve. So that was my more detailed thought, and that's where the discussion will go. So that's my starting thoughts on this one.
Yeah, John, it strikes me that it's always difficult to come into an existing art that's having a challenge and simultaneously as a contributor find some place to add value rapidly, but also not failing to seek to learn before seeking to be understood. From the text in that article, was it clear whether fundamentally the reason for this high need for communication cross team and cross art was fundamentally a team topology challenge, or I mean, was there any indication that was explored and found to be satisfactory, or is that still just a question?
Well,
So
honestly, John, before you answer that, Dan, I think we can keep this fairly generic in that this is not an uncommon statement, unfortunately,
Right.
very unfortunately, is we hear this all the time.
Yeah.
And one of the things I want to convey for this is don't start pointing fingers at leadership, because one, it does no good, but two, and I advocate for this all the time, these leaders are smart people trying to do the right thing.
Mhm.
They're not seeing the impact of what it's causing. They're not seeing that bullet going in the foot. They're just thinking that this is the right approach to do. So, and Johnny, you can add more details to the specific instance, but this is a generic problem. We see this all the time.
absolutely. And I think that's the key thing is there's ideas that we teach about lean product development that to get to real flow of value, there's all sorts of variables. You know, flow is to me as an engineer, as a physicist, flow is a function of, and then all these variables that come after it. And we can just put a bunch of stuff in there. We could create a really complex equation and do a doctoral thesis on it and collect a lot of data, but you know, it's just flat not worth it. Here's the important thing is when we talk about an agile team, the goal of that agile team, and this goes back to stuff like Alistar's work, which was agile software development, Shore and Warren's work, which is the art of agile development. These are folks who were around when they created the Agile Manifesto. And the goal of that agile team was a team of 7 plus or minus 2 folks. And we know that that's been changed lately, but I'm going to hang with that just for ease of talking. A team of 7 plus or minus 2 folks, plus a product owner, plus a scrum master, with the knowledge and skills to take an idea from idea all the way to release to the customer. And now there's another thing. What that says is if that agile team grabs a feature, so now we're talking a stream aligned team, if we're talking topologies, or a feature team, if we're talking a whole lot of other language, we got to keep in mind. So here we've got a feature that's got a first story, go all the way through in a last story, and when we're all done with it, that can get released, that chunk of functionality. And to me, those two ideas start to let us have a conversation about how do we set up teams that can do that. Now here's I'm going to call it the rub. Here's the twist. And in that picture, and Dwayne was talking about a screw backing out in a plate in the foot and how it starts to hurt after a while. So we got this pain in the foot. Now think of if we take an agile team with the knowledge and skills needed, but then we take off one skill and we remove it from the team. We have a cross team or cross functional area dependency. That's really simple. But it also says if we have all the stories for a feature from the first one to the last one, that means one of those stories or more has to go to somebody that's not on that team. So now we have a cross team or cross functional dependency in order to get that work out the door. And every time we do that, we create a delay and impediment. I love the phrase that Alistar uses in his book, Agile Software Development. He uses this phrase, erg seconds. And every time we have a delay, we could measure it. It could be in seconds. Hey, they're just they're just the next room. I can go over and talk to them. But some of our delays are much bigger. That's a functional area that exists. That's our test group, and they're over there, not here.
And they're
so now we get bigger delays.
Yeah, they're additive, because if you take the seconds here, then keep adding those up and adding those up, the seconds turned into minutes and hours and days and weeks. And every time that piles up, we lose opportunity to learn faster. And we have teams going at tangential directions, sometimes polar opposite directions. And until we bring it back together, that integration, it's really difficult. I want to turn the conversation though. Back to what I started this conversation with, what can insert art role title here? What can they do? What can a product owner do, a team member, a scrum master, a product manager about this? Because let's think about the average scrum master, if there is an average scrum master team coach, but they're looking around saying, I can barely have time to facilitate with my team because I'm asked to do all these other things, budget management and team reporting and things like that. How can I dig in and start to change some of these things? This is a cruise ship that is slowly sinking. What can I do to keep it afloat?
So on the art, to me, and you've got the scaled agile framework up. If you can click on continuous delivery pipeline and then scroll down, I think it's figures 5 and 6 that show the metrics here. And the 6 is the one with the little starburst. It says here we can improve. So these going through the process of how do we figure out how much time we're spending and some of our flow metrics. And this one right here. So figure 6. So between figure 5 and this one, this is something an art can do. So let's say we have a problem. We know it. Why do we know it? Because it's coming up every time, whether you call it a scrum of scrums or a team sync, it's coming up every week in there. Hey, we ran into this impediment. Okay. So now figure 5 is showing, let's capture current state in all the numbers that we know, even decently, it doesn't have to be perfect. And let's figure out what's the biggest impediment that we want to improve. And that's something that art, the people on an art can say, here's the one that hurts us most.
So I want to challenge that and almost play that advocate for this role. Not that I disagree with what you said. You're absolutely spot on. But me, Dwayne Stroman, I'm not an art. I'm a developer on team 3. I'm a cog in the machine, and I just come in to do my task. What can I do about this? I can't change these things. What can I do?
So Dwayne, I think you raised this earlier, the fact that managements make the best decision that they can with the information that they have, and with better information, better telemetry, more transparency to the process, they can make a better decision. And I think this is a case where, for example, a developer could say to their team coach or scrum master, hey, team coach, this hurts. Can we see if it's just hurting me, or is this thing just killing the whole team? And so at an individual team level, we can create more awareness, more transparency to what their delay in flow of value is. And then perhaps that team coach can bring that to the coach sync and say, hey, is this affecting others? And then cumulatively create greater visibility as to across the art, as figure 6 is showing. It's one thing if it's just affecting one team, but if truly we've uncovered one of these red starbursts where a change in that area could profoundly affect or positively affect the flow of value on the team, perhaps that's an area that we can get leadership excited about focusing some effort.
Well, and Dan, now you gave me an idea, and I'll step out of that role for a bit. Just providing data. I know as a software engineer, reporting time spent on something. Oh my gosh, why am I doing this? I'm just trying to show that I'm getting some work done. No, there's some value to it. Now, that doesn't mean the typical old reporting of here's the hours I spent, but using tools and updating statuses and having clarity of when something is sitting, waiting and idling, and no one's working on it, and when I'm actually actively working on it. This isn't about reporting how busy you are. It's not the mouse jiggler that we're hearing for, remote work and things like that. This is actively providing that data you were talking about so that we can now get more accurate measurements of the delays in between. And we can bring real data, not subjective, but objective data to say, wow, we have huge delays right here within the team.
Yeah.
And is it something because we're not working hard? No, we're working our butts off. The problem is we keep context switching. We keep doing the handoffs, all of those things. And here's the data to prove it. So that's one key thing that I can do in one of those roles is create good data, is be honest and transparent about when I'm working on something, when I'm not, what it's taking, where the bottlenecks are, bringing that data to the surface.
Yeah, John?
And so Dwayne, what you just said, and so if I'm a agile team member and I grab a story to work on, whether I'm working at pairing with somebody or just by myself, and I think you brought up a great point. One of the flow metrics that we talk about, and this flow metric has been around with lean forever, so it's not like it's new to project and product or new to safe. It's literally been around here forever. The cycle time and flow efficiency, which says if I'm working on a story and I'm figuring out when it's in work and when I'm waiting, and this goes back to the erg seconds thing. But at the team person level, right here, this one, so flow efficiency. Think about it. If at the story level, maybe one of those dips is for my story, I have to hand off to that functional area over there to get them to do something. So let's make, kind of a real life scenario. Let's say I have to give it to a data group to do something. And I'll just use that as an example. It has to go to data and then it comes back to the team because this organization chose to not put people with data skills on a agile team.
Or compliance scan or something like
Sure.
that.
It could be any of them, but
Yeah.
just to keep it focused, shoot, how about business rules or there's so many in there. But from an agile team member, the first step to me is, do I have a delay or not? That's just a tick mark. A next level is, well, how long do I have to wait? Well, maybe I count that in seconds or minutes or hours if it's really bad. But then daily stand-up the next day, I can bring up, say, hey, I was doing this story and I hit this point and we had to hand it off to that group. And I know y'all have seen this, but I decided to start collecting data. And so the team working together says, you know what, that's a really good idea. For our stories for this iteration, let's just collect some tick marks and let's count every time we get delayed. And then let's count the number of minutes or days or hours, whatever it is, of the time for that delay and start capturing it. And that's literally the agile team member. And then the scrum master in a scrum of scrums or something can say, hey, RTE and other scrum masters, we learned this. I don't know if you're experiencing the same thing in the back of the mind of that scrum master. They're saying, we know you are because we're all working in the same system. But now you have people say, that's kind of interesting. Maybe if we collected enough data, we could get the attention of a senior manager that might be able to help us do something. And now you've got this power that literally started at the development team member, but collecting data across these different teams on an art and within a PI, and I'm betting within a couple of iterations, you could probably collect enough really simple data to figure out, hey, is this something that we need to work on as an impediment or not?
And here, both of you know that flow efficiency is my favorite metric, other than the other one that I've created that isn't part of Scaled Agile, flow disruption, which we'll talk about in a bit. But flow efficiency, tell me how this is not the most accurate measurement to find very quick improvements. The other flow metrics will indicate we've got an issue. Flow efficiency says, yeah, and it's right here. Here's the problem.
That's right.
Because we see from the hand, Dan, you remember when we were getting ready to do our, at my house here, we were getting ready to do our conversation on lean flow in manufacturing and supply chain. So the analogy was, so Dan was standing right at my desk here, Rob was standing by me. There were two friends of ours that are industry experts from Amazon and UPS. And I was giving them the typical approach where I picked up this coaster. I think it was actually this one and said, okay, I'm adding some value to this. And I hand it to Dan, but Dan's working on something else. So it sits down for a while. And then Dan picks it up a week later, a couple weeks later, and he's able to add some value to it. Okay, so we had 2 weeks delay, but he's able to add it on. And then he passes it to Rob. Well, Rob is also focused on something else because of the lack of organization around flow. And he picks it up and looks at it and says, oh, that's not going to work. And it goes all the way back to me. So not only did we have the 2 weeks plus 2 weeks delay, it wasn't even the right thing to do. And we delayed that learning, that response for that time period. That is something that team members can easily measure. They can, by using tooling, by observation, they can gather that data to see this thing, if it takes a full iteration to deliver it, 8 of those 10 days, it's sitting waiting for someone to pick it up. It's just sitting there gathering dust, losing, decaying in value, delaying learning, all those things. That's something that at the team level, you can absolutely improve.
And when you
And
look at
often
go ahead.
without anybody else's approval, run small experiments to try to improve. And if one team's small experiments all of a sudden start bearing fruit, yeah, let's bring it to the art level and see if that solution is scalable in itself.
And I think one of the ideas that people might miss, and Dwayne, the way you were just saying that, if you can go back to that figure with the
Flow efficiency.
flow efficiency, yeah, figure 10. So if we're counting this, and by the way, you have to count this at the story level. And the tools most people use aren't really good at counting active processing time versus delay time at the story level. So the green bars and the gray bars there in the middle. You can collect flow time, but it's more difficult to collect actual time. And so most people default
But
into
you can, though. You
when
can
did I pull it
update
in
those
versus
tools.
when did I check it out. But the way, Dwayne, you just described it, really important to me is here we've got a story that supports the solving of a feature level problem. And let's say that feature level problem has 24 stories, just, nice round number, but this story gets delayed. And then that story gets delayed, and you got 24 stories that are all delayed. And that's additive. And we start to see this bigger and bigger delay for the problem we're trying to solve for the customer, the feature. And all of a sudden, people don't understand this really starts to add up.
Yeah, it does. And the problem is it adds up and we can't see it. Reminder, Dan and I come from a lean supply chain background. So we've both worked in reverse logistics, supply chain. I've worked in manufacturing. And I always advocate the key difference we have in manufacturing and supply chain. You can walk out on the warehouse floor, the manufacturing floor, the shop floor, and you can see waste. It's fairly easy to see it. Now, it takes a little bit more study and learning to determine the cause of that waste, but you can see it right there sitting in that stack of boxes, or someone pushing a Gaylord from point A to point B, and they're doing it quite often and it goes back and forth. Well, that's a waste of activity time. But in lean product development, it's bits and bytes on somebody's computer. So we have to actively measure this. And that's really what I'm advocating for. And I've worked with teams and I've done it myself where, yeah, okay, I'm starting on this story. I ran into a blocker. I'm working with Dan and John on this one. Hey guys, we can't move forward on this until we get XYZ. Can we? No, we can't. Okay. Put it in a different status, pending, on hold, something like that. Now, when we pick it up, we take it off hold and we say, okay, we're back to actively working on it again. And maybe there's a quick note about what caused it. Does that add to our workload? A little bit. But now by measuring that, by creating that more accurate data, we can come back and look at that after an iteration, after a PI, and say, aha, look at this. The amount of time that it was sitting on hold versus the time we were working on it, it's a 10-to-1 ratio. It was sitting on hold for 90% of that time. That's data that we want to do something about. And it's at the lowest level, the most important level of lean product development, as we're actually building these solutions out. That's where a lot of the delays come in. John, you and I have talked about bringing in the fuzzy front end as a conversation as well. It's not just at the team level, but it's one of the key areas where me, Dwayne, a junior developer on one of the Agile teams, can absolutely help improve flow efficiency.
And Dwayne, one of the things that you said, and it popped up, something that I've seen go on in many organizations. Unfortunately, if somebody has a block state in their tool that they're using to track stories, so many times I've seen teams, when they put it in blocked, it's just to get it off the plate. And then they don't even think about solving it. They go to the next thing. And what they don't realize, if that was the most important story, I've got to solve that impediment and get that out of blocked back into in work. And yet there seems to be a tie-in, a missing link, whatever we want to call it, that people say, if I blocked it, I need to work on it to get it fixed. It's not just saying, hey, Scrum Master, I have a blocked story. It's what can we do right now to unblock this thing?
So I want to challenge something you said. I can unblock it. Why don't we unblock it? That's, I think, the next step of that team evolution
Absolutely.
is I've got something that's blocked and it's focused on the most important story, which obviously prioritization then becomes really important. Having the product owner actually prioritize these stories. This most important story, there's a blocker. It's all hands on deck. It's the Kanban equivalent of the expedite row. It's everybody drop what you're doing. This most important story, there's a blocker. I need some help. Who can jump in and help me? Don't just set it aside and think, oh, that's the best we can do. That one's blocked, set it aside. I'll go work on something else. No, make it a critical, urgent component of removing that blocker so we can move on.
And we can escalate that. And I agree.
Yep.
It's we. It should never be I, but it should at least be we, as in the Scrum Master and I. But now think about this. If it's another functional area, you've got to go straight up to wherever level of senior management that can get the attention of somebody in that other group to say, hey, we have our most important feature. Your SLA says you're going to respond in 3 weeks or whatever the number is, and you are now delaying the most important feature that we pulled in for this PI. What can we do about it? How can we solve this now? But that's, to me, getting that attention. And we actually talk about this, and most people forget about this in that confidence vote. In PI planning, we say, if something doesn't go the way we expect, I'm going to raise attention to it immediately.
Mm-hmm.
Not tomorrow, not the next day, but immediately. And that's what this gets into at the story level.
Yeah, it's a definition of commitment. It's a guarantee of engagement, not guarantee of a completion. And when teams create that guarantee of engagement, we're going to stay engaged. Part of that is it brings about an accountability. It is my job to raise these issues as quickly as we discover them. And it is my job to stay focused on solving that since it is the highest priority item.
Yeah, and the sense of team obligation to meeting that commitment, not just an individual. And it's not hot potato. It's getting back to that idea of at our daily stand-ups, we're continually re-optimizing towards how do we meet our objectives most successfully.
Right. It's the understanding, and you mentioned the daily stand-up, the team sync. It's that understanding that the plan we make in iteration planning, the one thing we know for sure is it's wrong. That's the only thing
right.
we can guarantee.
That's
And
right.
be okay with that, because as we learn to work together as a team, we're focused on the highest priority stories first and so forth. Now that guarantee of engagement kicks in, because when a blocker comes up, Dan, you're blocked by that. What can I do to help?
Mm-hmm.
Because we as a team guaranteed that engagement, guaranteed that commitment.
Exactly.
It's
right.
not, oh, yeah, I'm doing, oh, Dan, you're stuck with that. Oh, stinks to be you. Sorry.
That's right.
No, that's not how that's how a collection of people works. That's not
Right.
how a team works. But John, you mentioned the Scrum Master. That's another key point here is oftentimes Scrum Masters are poorly trained, poorly guided, perhaps whatever, but they think that their job is task master, is budget master, is those things. No, it's Scrum Master, not budget master, not task master. It's none of those things. And so when these types of blockers come up, Scrum Master is there. Ha ha ha. What can I do? Let's get some more measurements in place. Let's get some metrics. Let me help the team members create these measurements. Let me help them assess what it means. Let me bring that information to leadership, whether art or senior leadership, whatever, and say, this is what we're facing. This is what the teams are struggling with. That's where Scrum Masters become the most vital part, that onboard coach. Not only the onboard coach, the onboard improvement sensei for lean flow of value. They're looking for these opportunities.
Well, and because you brought in the Scrum Master and the coaching, now all of a sudden we get into this connection here to the engineering practices. And what that says is, and I know we don't talk about, we don't use this word, but to me, I see the life cycle of a story. So this, we're refining the story, but then it gets pulled into an iteration, and then we've got to, do those last minute choices on modularization and encapsulation and solid and dry and grasp and all this stuff. TDD, test first, whatever that list is. By the way, for everybody, hint, hint, that'll be another podcast in the future. But all of a sudden we get into what are all the good engineering things that we do for every story that lead us up to the point where we have the acceptance criteria for the story tested. We can prove to the product owner we did the story, the product owner can accept it. Now it goes back in, and that's a life cycle to me for a story. And that sequence is something that the Scrum Master has to get so that they can coach it and talk about it in whatever practices we're talking about on this team in this particular circumstance. This Scrum Master needs to participate in and know, so they can watch for and see and say, gosh, did we miss unit test? Did we not have that? Did we miss some automation that we should have had, whether it's for unit test or acceptance test? And all of those things now start to come into play to say, are we doing all the engineering things in the micro? Because for any given story, this is going to last, what, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever it is. So it's not just team member grabs a story and goes off. And then, by the way, now think about this, how this connection to unfortunately, the non-collaboration at the team level. If I grab a story and I walk away and I shut off my Zoom and I go work in my corner of my house for a week, and then I come back with a story done, nobody knows what I was doing. Nobody knows that I was or wasn't following the things that we know have to be done for a story. And we can't fix it. We don't talk about it. And that's part of that lack of collaboration that we were talking about yesterday, that says we've got to increase collaboration at the team level in order to get better and better results.
I want to wrap this one up because this could go on forever, but I want to share one of my favorite cartoons from the past. This who wants change, who wants to change, who wants to lead the change. We have to stop pointing the finger at the system, at leadership, at the company, the organization, at management, and saying, oh yeah, there's nothing we can do. No, it's on us. I raised 4 children, and I always guided them in parenting about the only behavior you can control is your own. And that goes the same way for here. If you're on an art and you're struggling with, we just never get anything done. It seems like we work on the same thing over and over again. We run into all these bottlenecks. We'll start doing something about it. You have to start leading the change. And I'm not saying that you can dive in and tell leadership, we're changing this, we're changing this. You have to start providing data and information so they have the reason to change. That's part of it. But you can make these small little changes that, if you add up the micro change here, 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 it leads to pretty big change in fairly short order. So great discussion, guys. Let's wrap this one up because we could go on for hours about this topic. And John, you're right. We'll bring up the engineering topic and get more into the technical side of it, bringing in engineering practices to help flow, essentially. With that, thanks, guys, for joining the conversation, and we'll see you on the next round.
See ya.
Thanks, everybody.